something to do with the MOF, so I stopped by.
Yeah, he was telling me about that last week.
Colder in here than outside.
I think you're right.
It's always the way it is with our house. When it starts warming up outside, it's allowed the house to warm up.
And instead of like not just pertaining to that, but like other things I want to do, even if I have somehow my schedule's also filled with lots of coffee days and lunch and dinner. It does not feel like a waste of time.
Okay, are we ready in the booth? 7 o'clock, here we go. Welcome to Enneagram 6 night. Sometimes the Enneagram 6 is called the loyalist, sometimes the skeptic, sometimes the devil's advocate. And we'll also be doing a deeper dive into the core fear. I was hearing some discussion or looking at some discussion that included Enneagram online, and it was someone pursuing her PhD in something in the social sciences, and she sort of poo-pooed the Enneagram. And I don't think any of the teachers that I listen to say the Enneagram is hard science, but I feel like there's enough psychology in it that it makes sense to me. One of them pertains to all of us having a core fear. So what does fear have to do with your Enneagram type? The psychology of the Enneagram states that each personality type has a core fear that drives them, and this fear is something we defend against with our basic desires. For example, if someone fears being controlled by others, their basic desire would be to have freedom, which might deteriorate when we're in unhealthy spaces into escapism. Each type has its own basic fear, and it's kind of likely that we'll recognize the fears of all 9 types within ourselves, but our own type's fear motivates our behavior the most. So, for instance, some of the fears that you're about to hear will be fearing being bad or corrupt. None of us want that. I don't know if we'd all say that we fear it, but none of us want that. But ones in particular are driven by that fear. Type 2s are afraid of being unloved. All of us might resonate with being afraid of being unloved, but type 2s are motivated by it. Let me talk a little bit more at length about each type's fear. So, as I said, type 1, the reformer, the perfectionist, their fear is of being corrupt or evil. So, ones or reformers have extremely high standards for themselves. They strive to be good and righteous, feeling if they don't meet their high expectations that they are unworthy. As a result, they tend to be responsible, improvement-oriented, and self-controlled. Yay, ones. We're all glad for that. But on the downside, they can be judgmental, perfectionistic, and critical. And that stems, in part, from their core fear of being bad. They're so motivated by that. For type 2, they fear being unloved. 2s, the helpers, are extremely focused on caring for others. They have an innate need to help people, to give of their time and resources to ensure the well-being of others. They're extremely relationship-oriented and empathetic. We all benefit from that gift of the 2s. On the downside, they can be coddling, overbearing, and prideful. Type 3, the performer, fears being worthless. So they're called achievers also. They're driven toward success and accomplishment. They're very goal-oriented and determined. They work hard to achieve accomplishment and recognition. They tend to be enthusiastic, confident, and ambitious, and we all benefit from what they get done. On the downside, they can be overly image-conscious, impatient, and obsessed with status. Direct correlation to their fear. Type 4, the individualists, or the romantics. They fear being without identity or being insignificant. We're looking to understand our unique identities and purpose in life. Fours are idealistic, deeply feeling and sincere. They're highly original and intense, usually using creative means to express their rich inner world. On the downside, that focus on their own identity can lead to them being moody, self-absorbed, and melancholy. Type 5, the investigator. They fear being useless, helpless, or incompetent. They're intense, cerebral, and private. They're driven by their curiosity and a desire for knowledge and understanding. They feel like the more they figure out, the more they can defend themselves from their environment. On the downside, 5s can be eccentric, isolating, and scattered. Type 6. Type 6 fears being without support or direction. 6s are known sometimes as loyalists, and they're committed people, hardworking, and responsible. They're good at foreseeing security risks, troubleshooting, and circumventing problems. They feel like they need to question and test the outer world to determine whether it's trustworthy. On the downside, 6s can be doubtful, fearful, and pessimistic. Type 7, the enthusiast. They fear being deprived or in pain. None of us love it, but they're driven by that fear. They're usually adventurous, active, and charismatic people. They're the ultimate experiencers, wanting to taste, feel, and enjoy all that life has to offer. They strive to maintain freedom and happiness and are usually versatile and spontaneous. And on the flip side, that fear can drive them to be undisciplined, impatient, and overly impulsive. 8s, the challengers. They fear being controlled or harmed by others. 8s at their best are self-confident, resourceful, and strong-willed individuals. They want to control their environment and be in control of themselves. They aspire to be heroic, brave, and protective, especially of loved ones. On the downside, though, 8s can be confrontational, domineering, and intimidating. Type 9, the peacemaker. They fear loss and fragmentation. They tend to be accepting, trusting, and supportive people. They aim to be optimistic and see the best in others and in the world around them. They hate conflict and want everything to go smoothly, striving to create peaceful environments. On the downside, the fear of the 9 can lead them to be complacent, stubborn, and conflict avoidant. So that is the teaching on the core fear. That's one that I hear people sometimes really identify with their main type, the characteristics of the main type, or they really strongly identify with the triad, the centers of intelligence, the stances. Sometimes the lost message of childhood or the fear is something that comes to them later. So I'm about 5 years into my Enneagram work, and that fear, the fear of the 4 is one that I'm starting to sort of apply to my life and see it now. It's not something I saw plainly from the get-go. It's something to consider as you continue your Enneagram journey. Let's look at the 6s, sometimes called the loyalist, sometimes called the devil's advocate. Common characteristics of the 6 is that they're productive people, they're logical thinkers, they're fearful and prone to fight or flight during those times. They're motivated for the common good over motivated for self-serving opportunities. They're loyal, honest, overly focused on authority, and that might be that they're subservient or rebellious, but they have a strong identification with the authority figures in their lives. They can be anxious. They're committed to things that they deem worthy. And that might be their education or work, church, government, family, or social service. And at their best, they're reliable, warm, funny, self-sacrificing, devoted, and troubleshooting. They're in the fear triad. Those people are thinking dominant. So remember that your triad is determined by that center of intelligence, which is dominant. And for sixes, that's the head, that's thinking. And the stance is dependent. So they move toward people for help in forming ideas and opinions. They're oriented to the present moment, and they're thinking repressed. So just a reminder here, we talked about it once before based on a question that Audrey asked. You just heard me say that sixes are both thinking dominant and thinking repressed. It's just a unique quirk of what's called the inner triangle, the 3, 6, and 9. So 3s are feeling dominant and feeling repressed. 6s are thinking dominant and thinking repressed. 9s are doing dominant and doing repressed. I would be lying to you if I said I was an expert and had great understanding of it. As to how it pertains to the sixes, I'll repeat some teaching that I've heard in the past, that sixes are all the time thinking. And a lot of times that thinking is about planning for 20 worst case scenarios, 19 of which will never happen. So that was a waste of time. That was not the most productive thinking. But the sixes that I talk to say that I have to come up with a solution for every problem that I see, because it feels irresponsible not to. They're just seeing way more worst case scenarios and potential problems than the rest of us types are. The deadly sin or passion of the six is fear. And I thought it was helpful that the book clarified that what sixes actually experience is anxiety. The difference being fear is that uncomfortable feeling that we feel in the presence of a clear and present danger. Anxiety is apprehension over a threat that is unknown and may never materialize. The motivation, I do want to say the fear is of being unsafe or without support and guidance, and their motivation is for a strong need for security and consistency. Sixes might have wings of the 5 or the 7. The direction in stress or health the direction of stress or unhealth is the unhealthy characteristics of a 3, and the direction in security is the positive characteristics of the 9, the peacemaker. Some bullet points from the reading, the chapter on the sixes. Many Enneagram teachers believe that sixes are the most common type, possibly making up more than half of the world's population. I thought it was interesting also that even moments or whole seasons of smooth sailing can be problematic for a 6, making them anxious because they'll worry about what will come along and wreck it. These modern times are tough for 6s because many have figured out how to motivate with fear and have the technological access and expertise to reach the masses with their fear tactics. Among them, unprincipled folks in these categories and others, politicians, news media, marketing experts, and preachers. They use their tactics to push us all to one action or another, but it's particularly unhealthy for 6s. They're vulnerable to that. Once 6s commit to a person or a group, they are deeply devoted and will not withdraw over small disagreements. 6s turn to others for advice because they don't trust their own thinking. And they hold groups together with their loyalty, and teachers and coaches love them. Healthy 6s make great friends and partners. Calm, reasoned reassurance is key in dealing with a 6's anxiety. Never tease them for their fears or dismiss their worries if you want to make things better. And we should always want to make things better in conflict and stressful times. We're going to enjoy our interview, which was recorded in advance. I really appreciate this particular interview subject. It's Kristen Kaufman, who many of you would know, and she's done a lot of Enneagram work, and she's so insightful. I regret that we had some technical problems, and we took out some of the unworthy parts of the video, and some we left in because we were worried that you would lose the context if we took away these little buzzes here and there. So I think you'll learn a lot from Kristen. And we worked together briefly. So Kristen, why don't you go ahead and tell our class members a little bit about yourself, and you can even play the Mennonite game with the Waterford Mennonite Church if you like.
Okay, well, yeah, I just got the heads up that I would get to do this introduction, so I'll just kind of go off the cuff here. Kristen Graber Kaufman. I grew up in Lombard, Illinois. For anyone who's attending Waterford who might have connections there, I'm sure there are. I attended Goshen College from 94 to 98, where I met my husband, Travis. I have a degree in music education, and so that's what my career has been in. I'm currently teaching at the Community School of the Arts at Goshen College. I direct the Rejoice Children's Choir and the Somabochi High School Choir, and I teach private voice lessons to students at Fairfield Junior Senior High. And I'm a busy mom, and so I spend a lot of my time in volunteer capacities, also with the activities therein. Like right now, I'm involved in feeding the cast and crew of Guys and Dolls. We're doing 6 meals for 65 people, so that's been keeping me busy and a lot of fun. Both of our kids are involved in that. I'm also active at Belmont Mennonite Church, where I chair the worship commission and often lead singing and lead a vocal ensemble. And plug in there with MYF things. We're preparing for an auction coming up in March to raise money for upcoming conventions and things. So that's kind of how I spend my time and a little bit of who I am. Mother and father-in-law, Dwight and Carolyn, attend Waterford. And I have lots of other friends and connections at Waterford. I'm sure if I try to name them, I'd forget some. So I'll just say hi to everybody who I know in your community.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Deanna Beth and I both have had a chance to interview Kristen before, and so we knew that she would be a great example of a 6 to let you all hear. So Kristen, I wondered if you could just give us a brief history of your experience with the Enneagram and how you came to find your type.
Yes. So I first became familiar with the Enneagram at Belmont Mennonite Church, where Marlene Croft was leading a class. She was a seminary professor. She was leading a class on the Enneagram, which I just fully appreciated and absorbed and got really excited about. I wasn't quite sure about my type right away at the start of the class, but by the end was pretty sure. And then just did a lot of reading and conversations with people after that class. And then took a second class at Belmont, led by Rodney Deaton, who's a psychiatrist who also attends Belmont now. So I've had a class presented by a 1 and a class presented by a 4, which were led very differently, and I think were really helpful. Both of their approaches were really helpful in helping me find my type. I was stuck for a while. I'm a 6, as you know, and I think the 3s and 6s and 9s are kind of the last to identify themselves, especially 6 and 9 get kind of stuck. Also, as a female, I was mistyped as a 2 on some of the early exams that I took, written tests I took and online tests. And because I'm a 6, I was getting a lot of higher scores in the 9, which is where I integrate, or when I'm in health, look like the 9. So it's a little confusing at first, but with lots of reading and conversations and 2 classes, I came to settle on the 6.
Can I ask you, what helped you differentiate between that 6 and that 9?
I noticed that I'm thinking or head centered. And so that's what I tell friends who ask me, and they say, I don't know what number I am. I said, start with head, heart, or gut. And so I felt that I was very head oriented. I'm always thinking. And so I knew it made sense for me to be a 5, 6, or 7 to start with. And I would have loved to have been able to say I was the 9. I wish I was a 9 or a 2. I don't know. They're just these admirable types. But I knew that too much not I just noticed that this was more of my experience than a
Do
9.
you see your sixness as you look back at your
Definitely.
childhood?
I can remember having sort of the same scenarios that I deal with now as a child, where I would kind of just be fearful at night or think of worst case scenarios. One thing I do struggle with the Enneagram is the fact that you read a lot about the missed childhood message. Like the missed childhood message of the 6 was that you are safe, that for some reason I didn't hear that message. And it was helpful to get the clarification that the message was given. It just means it wasn't received, because I was definitely raised in a family, in a home where I was completely safe, and I knew that. But I guess that message is missed when you're innately wired like a 6. And so, yes, as a child, I could see situations where I would overthink or replay a conversation I had with someone, later in my own mind, the things that 6s do. I could see that as a child and as an adult.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. We've talked at length, I think, about how you can feel this as a childhood wound or a missing message, or just looking through your own lens. You tend to miss that message, even if it was given frequently and often, and other people in your family received it. That's part of the nature part of the Enneagram, is that's how we're wired. So I think that's interesting that that's how it resonates with you. So sixes have trouble trusting sometimes. Do you have more trouble trusting others or trusting yourself? Or who do you trust more, yourself or others?
In general, I would trust myself more, because I know my thoughts and motives. And I think that's what I question in other people. So, the 6, we have things like, well, I'll have to wait and see what I think about that, or I'll have to wait and see if that's really, truly what they mean or what they'll do, or, what's behind what they're saying. So we're constantly wondering about that and not seeing things at face value as much as we could reach myself more. But yet, oddly, the 6, and I will say this, I won't digress now, I'll lose my train of thought, but I'll say that after this. The 6 often will ask other people what they think, but sometimes that's not because we're actually willing to take their advice. It's because we're just looking for an extra layer of outside affirmation that our idea is good, or our plan is okay, or our thinking is right. So, I trust myself more, but yet my friends and family know that I do come to them for advice and thoughts and help as well. But what I was just going to dive into saying was that I know a lot of people watching this will identify as 6s. And I just want to say that I have sat in classes before where there's been a guest 6 that's presented. And I listen to her and I'll say, well, that's kind of like me, but that's not like me at all. And I just want to say the disclaimer that we can be different. And if you think you're a 6 and what I say doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't mean we're not both 6s. It just means we're different in some ways. And I'll try to speak for myself instead of all 6s, but if I say 6s, take it with a grain of salt. It may or may not resonate with all 6s out there.
Can I dive a little deeper into the idea of you may ask others for affirmation? What if they don't give you what you want to hear?
It's frustrating. And my daughter did that the other day. With something small, and she's a 9, but in stress she can act like a 6, and so she was kind of displaying this. Tell me what you think of this, and I either didn't give her a strong enough reaction, or I said something she didn't agree with, and then I was just kind of like worthless to her, like, oh, it's just frustrating. You want to just dismiss? You didn't give me what I needed, right? And so it's just kind of frustrating, but you can't fault the person that you're asking. They're legitimately giving you their opinion and trying to be honest and helpful, when really they don't know. Really what I needed was just someone to say, you're right. And that's completely unfair to them. If I want that, I should approach someone and say, I really need someone to reassure me that my thinking is right instead of what do you think, right? So yeah, it can be frustrating, and I'm sure for the other person as well, if they notice I'm not getting what I'm wanting from their input.
Mhm. So do you go looking for someone else, or do you decide to trust yourself?
I think I ultimately trust myself, because I think I come to a decision on my own, and then I have this time period where I'm looking for someone else to just reassure that. And then if they don't, I'll say, okay, then I'm doing it anyway. You know, I think that's kind of my pattern.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So sixes are sometimes known as the loyalist and
Mhm.
sometimes known as the skeptic.
Mhm.
Can you teach us how those paradoxical identities might both be true?
Yeah. So I don't think they're opposites, and I think you can be both. When I think about being loyal to someone or something, or to, for example, like to my church family, since we're in a church setting, we can talk about that. I'm deeply committed to Belmont. I commit lots of time and energy to the work of the church. I'm going to remain loyal to that, but it doesn't mean that when I come to the table, with literally in a meeting setting, for example, that I won't call something to question. Like, I don't see how that's going to work. I'm comfortable saying that I can raise skepticism and questions in that setting, but it doesn't mean because I don't see it's going to work that I will bail out. So I will stay and I will do the work and I'll be loyal, but I'm also able to raise questions and say, I don't see how that'll work. Will that work? Let's play that out. So I think it can be both, and that's just one example.
Okay, speaking of paradox, there's this push-pull quality that sixes experience. Sixes can be known for a desire for independence and for dependence on authority figures as well. So a bent to blind obedience to authorities and also rebellion. Can you help us understand that better?
I saw this question earlier, and I think I recall it from another interview, but it's one that I get a little stuck on. I don't really have a great answer for that. I think it kind of comes back to what I just said earlier about I can independently reach a decision or on something I'm going to do or participate in, right? But yet somehow I will look to someone else to affirm that. So I'm dependent on someone else telling me, yes, you're right in thinking that, or yes, I affirm you moving forward with that. So I think there's a little bit of but am I really wanting or needing them? Because I just told, Lori, that I would just ultimately move on anyway if someone isn't giving me that reassurance. So there, maybe that's kind of a small example of independence yet dependence. Probably at the heart of it is a lack of trusting myself that I do have a right thinking or a right plan in mind. So maybe that's kind of where it's at, that I can come to decisions independently. I sometimes depend on others to reassure me. And maybe because I don't always trust I'm thinking correctly about it, or that my thinking is enough. So that's kind of what I have to offer in that regard.
Do you notice yourself being skeptical or ready to doubt new leaders or authority figures until they've proven themselves? Or do you see yourself as, they were put into this position of authority or leadership, and I trust that the system is working well?
I think that depends on the situation and the person, but in general, I will wait till I see for myself that they are who they say they are, or that I won't just blindly assume they're the right person for the job, or they're, for example, I will wait to know for myself.
Right.
And that's something that I apply to a lot of things in life besides just trusting authority. I will come to my own decision on a lot of things.
Yeah.
My own thinking about things.
Yeah. So this paradox also leads us to phobic and counterphobic sixes. So the teachers that we have spent a lot of time listening to, Ian Cron, Suzanne Stabile, they talk about this maybe more than the teachers that introduced you to the Enneagram.
Sure.
So I think in the past you've had to do some research. I remember you teaching us well about phobic and counterphobic sixes. What can you offer this group?
So I think all sixes are on a continuum between phobic and counterphobic. And maybe that's the safe answer. And for me, it's situational. The 4 that presented the class at Belmont gave each number a name. And the 6 was the only that had 2 names. The 6 was Sid and Cindy. And I thought, why did we get 2 names? Why did we get 2 dual personalities? And I think he was getting at the phobic, counterphobic thing. I don't feel like I'm 2 separate people. I feel like I am one personality on a continuum. So like right before the meeting started, we were talking briefly about something, and I'll come back to that. I can, in certain situations, be fearless. I don't walk around carrying anxiety and fear about everything. I don't feel like I'm a nervous Nelly, a highly anxious person externally. In some settings, like I can walk into a room and lead a rehearsal without fear. Adrenaline, yes, but no fear. Or walk on a stage in front of 700 people and not be afraid. Yes, have adrenaline, but not be afraid. But then I can also be known to like drive to take my recycling at Shanklin Park when it was still there and see it's getting dark and there's another car and I will literally drive back out. My gut just says, danger, go. And so that's a little crazy and that's a little bit phobic. So I can experience both phobic and counterphobic traits in my life, depending on the day, depending on the situation, but I don't feel like I live fully in one or the other extreme.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know that sixes struggle with fear and anxiety both. So the text that we use says that there's a difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is that uncomfortable feeling that you get in the presence of a clear and present danger.
Mm-hmm.
And anxiety is that same discomfort when the threat is only a possibility and it's not confirmed. Mm-hmm. So what makes you feel safe?
Mm-hmm. For me, I feel safe when I'm prepared. I feel safe when I've thought through things, when I know what to expect. I guess, it's hard else to describe, how else to describe that, but those would be the first few things I think of.
You once told me a plan makes you feel safe.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Right. And I understand that in life, the plan always changes, but to know a starting place rather than just to jump into something. I mean, there are some personalities and numbers you'll talk about that we're much more comfortable just going, just more impulsively. And that would not be the 6. Yeah.
Can I jump in for a second?
Go ahead.
So we talk about the 6 kind of worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give us an example just for numbers who don't have that in their heads all the time of like, what worst case scenario are you planning for?
Yeah. Man, I wish they wouldn't always creep in. And it does feel a bit like a psychosis. It's like, why did that come through? But I think it's what we do with those thoughts, right? I feel like anxiety is ruminating on those and staying paralyzed by those thoughts. I have these little scenes or ideas pass through my mind all the time. For example, as you asked, my kids in the musical I mentioned earlier, during the musical, they went to do a work day today. I knew they were doing some stuff, some work on the set. And most parents would be like, all right, have a good day. And I get to say, okay, Lawson, like if you're moving set pieces, just be really careful. You can't afford to get hurt before the show. So no, like very few other people would say that on their kids on the way out the door. But I'm always thinking about, gosh, I hope he has a great day and they get a lot done, but I hope he doesn't get hurt. Like these big wooden things they're moving or whatever they need to handle today, like it would be bad if he got hurt before the show. So that crosses my mind, and a lot of people wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah. And I bet you can't let it cross your mind and just float on by. You've got to put something in place like a warning. in order
Yes.
to make sure that it doesn't happen. Yeah.
That is what sixes feel strongest, is the burden of responsibility to stop it. And that if I wouldn't say it, oh, would I feel so guilty if it happened and I didn't give the warning. So that is key to sixes. If you are out there wondering if you're a six and you feel that burden of I have to say something because I need to stop it, and if I don't, I will be to blame, you're probably a six. Like, that is at the heart of what we wrestle with.
My sixth daughter tries to parent us sometimes.
Mhm. Sure. Yep. Because she
Okay.
deeply cares, right? She deeply
Yes.
cares about your
Yes.
safety and your well-being.
And we know that sixes care especially about the group more than themselves, like more than putting themselves first. So, yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what makes you feel loved by those closest to you?
You mean as it relates to my sixness?
As it does, yeah.
Yeah, definitely being heard and understood, and not dismissed or mocked for my fearful hunches or worries or thoughts. The respect for the fact that I need more time to think through something. Like, a lot of parents might, for example, be quick to say to their child who says, can I go do a so-and-so tonight? Yeah, sure. For me, it's like, okay, I have to think through like a lot of other layers, than most people. But I'll eventually get there. My husband's a 1, he's got reactionary, and he's quicker to answer in situations than I am. So if there is a situation where we have to decide on something as a family, or we have to decide as parents about something for our kids, I feel most loved by him when he understands that, I'm going to need more time to get more information. I'll probably come around, but let's just take a minute, honor the fact that mom needs more information. She needs to think through what else needs to get done. And when it feels like it's going to make sense and it's okay to do it, okay, then do it. So those kind of considerations. And to know that I'm not trying to overthink, and I'm not trying to think about things through the lens of fear or anxiety, but it's just, how I'm wired, and some understanding for that, rather than like, oh my gosh, you're always thinking of the worst, which I've also been told, and that doesn't feel as good. So
Yeah. Well, you're honing right in on, one of the best things about Enneagram is that it teaches us that we think uniquely, and it makes space for us to understand that other people are thinking uniquely, and that we won't think about the things in the same way. So when there is conflict, how does it work best to resolve with you as a 6? How do you prefer that people come at a conflict with you?
Definitely just one-on-one, normal tone of voice conversation I welcome. My husband is a 1, and when there's conflict, he will address it directly, and 1s also want to fix everything right away. And so that's a different style and a different way of being wired than I am. So we've had to come to figure that out. And also the kids too need to figure that out. And know that their dad is going to respond to conflict with them differently than I do. So that's just the tip of the iceberg there. But
now, you'll be able to explain this well. And I think Lori and I are already on board, but you said 1s want to fix things right away. 6s want to fix things too. So how do you manage, how is that different between you and he?
I feel like he will deliver a solution to someone else because he knows what's right in the situation and his thinking. Well, you need to go do this right now. And he thinks he's helping. And in a lot of ways, his ideas are right. But there's a lack of addressing the emotional part of a conflict. And that's the discrepancy between the two of us with the way we respond to each other or to our children. It's not that his thinking is wrong. It's often the more of an aggressive approach and the style of the way he presents and says, you know, rather than helping someone talk through something and helping them arrive at a solution, you know, it works with only a very select few people to just be told when they're distressed, do this. And many, who says, oh yes, thank you. Like a lot of us, I mean, maybe some people do, but most people are like, oh, you've attacked me. Okay. So now I'm just mad at you and I'm not going to seek more advice from you. And then there's a shutdown. So that can happen, you know? So yeah, we've just had to adjust and talk through that. And yeah, like I said, the kids recognize the difference. And what's really cool is when I am in health and I integrate, I move toward the 9. And so that is a peacemaker, a peacekeeper. And with 2 teenage kids and a 1 husband, I feel like I'm required to take the role of peacemaker a lot. And so I love that because it moves me to the zone that I should be in my best optimal health. And I don't necessarily mind it. And I feel like a better person and more at peace with myself when I think of things through the lens of a 9 and have to stay in that space of peacekeeping and peacemaking. So maybe that's not all bad that I married a 1 or we have conflict with our conflict styles with our children.
Yeah. Oh, that was actually very, very helpful. So his tactic of making things better is to control behavior, to force action that will solve the problem. And you're seeing that it's actually more efficient to take the time to get somebody on board to arrive at that good action. Okay, I like that. Thank you. So what do you love about being a 6?
That's hard to answer. And most of the class will be thinking, you know, a lot of us hate our numbers. You know, they say when you arrive at the number that you're like, oh, please don't let that be me. It's probably you. So it's a great question to have to answer. What do you love about your 6-ness? I guess I like knowing that people identify me as thoughtful because I'm always in my head. I'm thinking all the time. Prepared. I'm considered reliable. Yeah, I mean, prepared in even tangible ways too, not just like making a plan, but my family laughs at me, but they're pretty thankful when they're the recipient of like something in that extra bag that I packed for the hike, because of course we can't just go for a hike. We have to pack for every worst case scenario that might happen. So like, oh, guess what? You're starving? I might have granola bars. I totally have them. And if you have a blister, I've got Band-Aids. So it's kind of a joke, but it's also fun to be known as the person who's always going to have what you need. In fact, someone just the other day at musical, no, it was at ISMA. It was Instrumental ISMA. A parent came up to me and said, I know you're the one that would have this. I so need a safety pin because my daughter's hem just came out. And I was so upset that was one thing I didn't have in my purse. But I guess that's one thing I like is people knowing that I'm prepared and reliable and usually have things they need and they can count on me for that.
Great.
Yeah.
What do you wish others understood about being a 6?
That we aren't always walking around in a cloud of anxiety. And even though we have worst case scenarios cross our mind, they're not always paralyzing. That we don't desire or choose to have a worst case scenario pass through our mind. And we are all working at learning how to cope with setting aside the irrational things that cross our minds. That if we need extra time to process something, maybe take the time to honor that. Try not to respond with a mocking or, I don't know, dismissive, are you serious? That's totally not going to happen kind of response to us, because that's going to make it a lot harder for us to move forward in something. So those are just some of the general nuggets about being a 6.
I
Do
think
you
those are
happen
very
to know your wing? Do you think you're a wing 7? Because I find you to be so fun.
Yeah. I have a
Yeah.
7 wing, which is, if you want to talk about paradox, let's talk about that. How can the 6 have a 7 wing? Because like on paper, we're opposites. And my son is a 7 wing 6. So we're flipped. And it was so fun because the other day he made the comment like, thank goodness I have a 6 wing. And I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. Tell me about it. I'm glad too, because like one time at summer camp, he was given the most cautious award. And if anybody out there knows Lawson, they're like I said, how did you get the cautious award? And so once in a while, that 6 wing will ground him and he will think about things, in a way that just a 7 or a 7 wing 8 might not. So yeah, it's fun that they can be each other's wings because 6s definitely can benefit from some of that 7 energy, which pulls us into a more impulsivity, which is opposite of what we normally do, and more fun instead of such severity, which the 6 can be bound by. So that would be my wing. And that's also why a lot of you out there watching who are 6s think, boy, she doesn't seem like me. You may not have a 7 wing, you might have a 5 wing, which would look very different than what I sound like or look like.
The last question we like to ask is, what is your superpower? I'd like to add that may be part of your answer is, what happens when the worst case scenario actually happens? So like a pandemic. Does the 6 bring their superpower into that type of situation?
There's a lot of questions in there. A lot of 6s are amazing in the face of a real for problems constantly. We're constantly preparing for a disaster on some level. And it's like when something is in our face that truly is traumatic, we're there. I remember feeling that way when my dad collapsed on the vacation some summers ago. My sister and I were there and we were actually quite calm, and thankfully other people arrived on the scene. But even though we carry around this heightened level, this heightened radar with us everywhere we go, in the face of a real conflict can be surprisingly calm and grounded and thoughtful about what needs to happen. Say again the other part of your question.
Well, I just wondered if you consider, like, the question is, what is your superpower? What do you bring to the table? Is that it, or is there something beyond that?
I think it's definitely playing something out down the road and seeing ahead. Because, I mean, lots of people in a group setting, in an institution or a organization or a board or something, they have all kinds of gifts, and thankfully we all bring something to the table that balances the group, and that is the one thing the 6 brings. Some people get frustrated with us because the people that are in the present that are wanting to work out like what's immediately in front of us will feel like the 6 in the room might stall them out because we're like, wait a minute. But when we get to this point, that's not going to work. And it can be frustrating for the gut reactionary people, or the people that, like a 3, they're not gut reactionary, but the task-oriented task completers might feel frustrated at the pace the 6 wants to slow down and say, but this is where I see this is going, this isn't going to work. Or, so I feel like the ability to see ahead or to anticipate actual real problems. We can do that too. Like, we don't have just fictitious scenarios in our mind all the time. Like, there were 2 situations this week where I got just a small blip of information from someone, and it triggered me to think through something completely. And I said, that means that, which means that, which means that, and now I have to make a phone call. And it twice avoided a major problem. So I think that's our superpower.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
All right, Kristen, thank you so much. You teach us so well. It's great to have Enneagram informed people who have really done their work to be our guests and to teach us about that number. Enneagram 6s, we have Enneagrams.
So it's amazing how the Enneagram just brings you face to face with yourself over and over again. Because I'm going to be honest, because I was in that video, it hurt my one eyes to look at it. It's hard enough to look at myself in the video, but to see my mouth or my hands moving and not words coming out of the speaker, that hurt me.
I do hope it didn't distract you from hearing the solid gold that was coming out of
Well,
Kristen's mouth.
yes, I was going to say that my ears really could appreciate what Kristen was saying. And if any of you had been in my place in that video, I would have told you it was great. She had solid teaching. We were able to overlook the fact that your mouth was moving and no words were coming out. So I'm going to listen to myself and what I would tell you, and I really hope that you were able to overlook my mouth moving and Deanna Beth's mouth moving and appreciate what Kristen had to teach us. So the sixes make great friends and partners. They are loyal and committed, and they are very good at bonding people together. They believe in the importance of relationships and make choices based on those values. They value community, and they won't give up easily on their idea of community. They're faithful and dependable, and they are the glue that holds us together. Sixes are great on a team, both because they are loyal and because they're able to be skeptical and play that devil's advocate when they consider an issue. It helps the rest of us make sure that we're considering more than just our side of the issue. Sixes also show concern for those in their lives. They want us all to be safe and secure, and they work hard to make sure that that happens. Even though the deadly sin of the six is fear, they show us courage all the time by persevering through that fear and continuing on in spite of it. If you're in a relationship with a six, you can show them love by offering support. Realize that they may be seeing the world often through fear-tinted glasses, but don't be quick to label them as pessimists or downers. Just reassure them that you're there. Understand that the six needs a solid foundation of trust, and be consistent in following through what you say you're going to do. Show extra love and support when anxiety arises. Respond to them kindly and ask where those fears are coming from. Let them know in conflict that even if you don't agree with them, you still love and support them. I think this was really important, what Kristen said. Don't dismiss the six's fears or make fun of them. That can just amp up their anxiety. It's more helpful to help them process the what-ifs. If they're imagining a worst-case scenario, help them walk through each step. Well, if that happens, then what? And then what? Help them see that the worst case is not only not necessarily very likely to happen, but even if it does, they'll be okay. Sixes often doubt their ability to make good decisions because they forget their past successes. So we can help them remember how well things have turned out in the past, the last time they were faced with a similar decision, or even if something happened the way they didn't want it to, how they made it through when those results weren't what they hoped they would be. We have another six to share with you, just a really brief snippet. And this six is here with us tonight, so we appreciate him being here.
I'll respond to Deanna Beth's 3 questions she gave me for about being a 6 on the Enneagram. So in response to the question, how do I manage being fearful or anxious? I try to recognize that probably this fear is not really based in reality. When I spin out those worst case scenarios, it's probably only a slight possibility that it'll ever come to fruition. And I try to remember often I'm worrying about it in the middle of the night, but I try to remember, tomorrow morning, this is not going to feel like such a big issue. And sure enough, the next day, it seems pretty ridiculous that I was worrying about whatever I was spinning out to the worst case. I also try to remember the passages in Scripture that say God tells us, do not fear, I am with you. Do not be afraid. I've been inspired and taught this most by dear friends who are here without the documentation to be here. And we've asked them how do they handle that and not be overcome with fear. And they say, our faith is in God, and whatever happens, God will be with us. So that's inspiring for me. In response to the question, what makes me feel safe? Again, it's trusting God, recognizing I don't have to handle this on my own, but God, who is full of love, is there with me. And also getting information on whatever information I can get. As a 6, I like to gather information, and that helps me to have a better sense of how it's going. And I guess in response to what I want others to know about being a 6, I would say, while it might annoy my spouse when I'm super prepared about going someplace and doing something, double checking everything, she does acknowledge that I'm a great trip planner. And she says she doesn't have to worry about things because I've already worried for the both of us. And I guess the other thing is I appreciate it when I spin out my worst case scenarios and she gently says, well, that might happen, but what if it wouldn't happen? And it helps me to get grounded again. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I hear some similarities in what you say, Jeff, and what our 5 interviews said last week. Do you know your wing?
I think now it's a 5 wing.
Okay.
I think, and I was going to ask this, I don't know, when I was younger, I thought it was a 7, but as I read through some of the 5 wing stuff, I see now a bit more on that end.
So some of the teaching suggests that we do have one wing in the first half of our life and then often add the other wing in the second half of our life, so that would seem consistent. But I do think maybe it's one reason you look a little different from what we saw with with Kristen, is that you maybe had that strong 5 wing. And you sounded a lot like in your preparation for trip planning, like our speaker last week. Thank you again for sharing. So 6s, as we think about growing, your personal growth, some things for you to think about. 6s find it difficult to trust, especially that situations and life will turn out okay if they haven't processed every potential outcome and possible way that things could go wrong. Remember, 6, that you are stronger than you know and more courageous than you think you are. Remember that your courage does not have to be based in what you alone can do or accomplish. Work to develop your courage by strengthening your faith in yourself and also in what is bigger than you. Faith asks you to trust that perfect love can cast out all fear. 6s, you can struggle with self-doubt. You doubt in your ability to make good decisions and then deal with the anxiety that arises at the possibility of a fallout of a poor decision. You need to remember that you're strong. 6s need to remember that their past successes in making good decisions and that they've had those successes and they can look back on them. And they need to remember that even if they did suffer consequences from a faulty decision, that first of all, they survived to make this decision and they can learn from failures as well as successes. 6s can spiral into worry, asking what might happen if. Learn to use this as a question to pull you out of that spiral by directly addressing the what ifs. It will help you to move forward because it will help you to see that often the worst case scenario is not very likely, but even if it is, it helps you to realize that if the worst case scenario that you are envisioning comes true, you can handle it, just like you've handled situations in the past. Remember that you are stronger and more courageous than you believe you are. And when we think about some spiritual practices for the 6, so some things that we think of as moving in spiritual growth for the 6. The book says that on the path for spiritual growth, 6s need to hold 2 conflicting things in tension. That they live in a culture that's never going to let them feel safe because fear sells, and that they're safe. Practices that may come more naturally to a 6 in the pursuit of spiritual growth are things like journaling. Journaling will allow the 6 to press into what they're afraid of and then to work through those what-ifs. It will allow them to grow in the process of recognizing that fears will arise, but that they don't have to let that fear keep them stuck. It can also serve as a record of the times when things turned out well, even when you were afraid. Another practice that a 6 might consider is meditating or centering prayer. This can be valuable for a 6 by allowing them to calm their busy minds, by focusing on a particular verse or sacred piece of poetry or truth. 6s may tend to avoid silence because they don't want to fall deeper into their fears or amplify that internal distress. But when 6s choose to engage in silence through meditation or centering prayer, they can grow into that truth that they're strong and resilient. Memorizing specific Bible verses or poems or truth from other thinkers can be valuable for the 6 when those fears arise, to be able to pull up something to remind themselves that things will be okay, and even if they aren't, you will be okay. And then the last suggestion is fasting. So fasting can mean different things. For the 6, regular fasting from things that feed your fears, like the news, books, or the media, even Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, can be helpful. But actual fasting from food can be helpful as well, as it can reinforce the idea that God is enough to meet your deepest needs. So 6s, you show us God in your faithfulness and loyalty. You teach us to be vigilant, to ask questions, and to respond well to risks. Know this, you are safe. It will be okay, and if it's not, you will be okay. All right. So we have time for a few questions. I will ask you to be thinking next week, be thinking of our friend Deanna Beth. She will not be here. She's taking the next step in her recovery from cancer. So it will be the Chris and Lori show next week. My husband, the 7. And Deanna Beth will be joining us by a pre-recorded video. So, yes, if anybody has any questions, we can repeat them. Or Deanna Beth, you give them your mic.
Yep, sure.
You might have to come down for testimony time.
While you're thinking and processing, I was finding myself panicking a little bit, thinking, okay, when I said that unscrupulous versions of politicians, salespeople, news media people, and preachers can capitalize on the fear, and I heard an audible gasp. I wanted to make sure you heard me say that it's the unscrupulous versions of those people. I trust that there are folks of integrity in all of those areas, and especially here at Waterford.
Now, I thought I heard a murmur of agreement.
Oh, okay, all right. Let's go with that version. did the teaching, we developed our curriculum and I didn't reread the chapter before. When we talked about phobic and counterphobic sixes, did you follow along if you'd done the reading? It mentions it in the reading, right? Phobic and counterphobic. I wanted to make sure that was clear to you.
I do like how she said it's on a continuum. Like, people always say, are you phobic or counterphobic? And I feel like I'm both. And so that was good to hear her say that it's, you can be both. You're not just one or the other.
I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it too. Audrey was saying that she found Kristen's teaching helpful, that she believes she sees herself on a spectrum, and in some circumstances she might be very phobic, very afraid, and everyone knows it, and counterphobic in other times where she sort of flies in the face of the fear, and she can be bold in those times. And you had a question, I think, right, behind Jennifer?
Yes. I have a friend who's having a hard time deciding between 5 and 6 in terms of having, is loyal, is in the head, and is there a clear, if you were to try to give, what's a clear distinction that would differentiate between 5 and 6? Some of the characteristics seem to overlap a little bit.
Yep, characteristics would overlap. I always come down to, well, are the numbers in different stances and different triads? Let's think about this. 5s, 6s, and 7s are all in the fear triad, so they share a triad, but they are in different stances. So 5s would be in the withdrawing stance, 4s, 5s, and 9s. And they tend to retreat a little bit when there's deep thinking to do. They come up with their thoughts and opinions in the privacy of their own mind. And so sometimes people can feel shut out from those folks. Other characteristics of the withdrawing stance is doing repressed. So that means that they might not have as much get up and go when the rubber meets the road. And we said doing repressed. Oh, orientation to time is the third thing in stances. So, I don't know if it'll be helpful in this case, but like a tendency to reflect or dwell on the past, look to the past for meaning and significance. Now, 6s are in your stance, 1s, 2s, and 6s. That's the dependent stance. And they would be more likely, like Kristen said, I want to go to other people with my ideas, and I'm hoping that they'll say, good idea. They will go to others to sort out their thoughts and opinions, which is different from withdrawing, because we do that in the privacy of our own minds. And thinking repressed is what compliant or dependent stance folks are. And that's a hard one for people to see themselves in, especially if they think they're thinking a lot and they think just fine. In that case, it's probably more that they will think externally, they need to process with others, or maybe in a journal, in order to do their best thinking. That's the 6. That's the 6.
I think 5s tend to be more inner-centered, so they research, they go deep to help themselves feel safe in situations. I think the 6s tend to be more concerned that everybody is safe. They, like Kristen was saying, they have to take the step to make sure their children know what to do to be safe, or play out that scenario. I think the 5, it's more about being able to research enough that they know what they're walking into to feel safe. And maybe it's part of being in that dependent stance versus the withdrawing stance.
That's a good point. 6s are more community-minded. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, next week is our final type and our final guest, the super fun 7s.
I have to tell you about this picture. So Chris was very disappointed, our 7, was very disappointed when he realized that that picture was not of him. Because he has done that before. So he would have thought, he thought I should use a picture of him having fun. So we
All
will
right.
look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much.